Okay, parents, welcome to AskTetsu. I think I finally found the perfect answer to this question that I get all the time from parents. Is it too late for my child to learn, insert language, whatever language that they're trying to learn? And you ready? It depends. I know you're not satisfied. Well, it depends on what? Well, that's what this video is going to be about. It is a difficult question because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. Now, for I think the general public, everybody knows that it's easy for kids to speak well. They all say kids are like sponges, right? But on the other hand, we do see that there are adults, especially these folks who love languages, these so-called polyglots, people who learn a lot of languages, and they can do it very well. I mean, some of them really take it to the extremes. So it's not that if you become an adult or if you become older, you cannot learn languages. But there is this general, I think, impression that kids are much better at learning languages. So there's this thing called the critical period hypothesis, which basically says that language acquisition is at its best in this limited period of time after birth, and it declines starting around the age of 7 or so, and just goes down and into the late teens. Once after that, it just becomes very, very difficult for anybody to learn a language to extremely high levels. I found this graph in a really famous TED Talk by Dr. Pricia Kuhl from University of Washington, and I highly recommend you go check out this video. I'll link it in the descriptions below. It's I saw this like maybe 10, 12 years ago. It's really really opened my eyes. So that's my first contact with the critical period hypothesis. But whenever I show this graph to my polyglot friends, they basically lose their mind. They always go, I've learned so many languages and I've gotten to very high levels. So they always cite their own experience anecdotally to refute the critical period hypothesis. And I also learned from Dr. Krashen, Professor Stephen Krashen of the input hypothesis, that the language acquisition device never shuts down. So basically he's saying that your capacity to learn languages should be there all throughout life. And in fact, one of my very good polyglot friend, Steve Kaufman, he's actually learned like 6 or 7 languages after the age of 70. So it is definitely possible. But from general observations, we all know that these are more the exception than the rule. For whatever reason, don't really know. Perhaps some of the information that I talk about today could shed some light. So I recently stumbled upon this really, really nice video by a professor at the University of Yokohama. I don't know if that's the Yokohama National University, and by a professor called Shiro Ojima. And this was, I think, one of the best videos that summarizes the whole critical period hypothesis for me from various angles. And it's really a fun video. It's about 30 minutes, but it is in English, so I do recommend you go check it out. He first makes the distinction between your first language or native tongue. So in the linguistics world, it's called L1. So language 1. If you look at your L1, it's pretty much indisputable that you see the observation of critical period hypothesis, or CPH. I'm going to say CPH going forward, and they draw these conclusions from studies of feral child. That's the first time I hear this term, but it's basically children who've been isolated from any language learning. Oftentimes, these are children who have gone through child abuse, and so I think there's 2 famous children who have been studied. And the first one's called Jeannie, and she was isolated from all language learning until the age of 13 when she was finally released. The police found her and took her into custody, and then they did studies on her. And then there was another child called Isabel. She was released at age 6. So they compared these two children and how they learned languages, and they found out that Isabel at age 6, she was able to really learn from basically zero to a very high level. By the time she was 8, she was almost caught up with, all the other 8-year-olds around her. So the recovery was very quick. Whereas Jeannie never really recovered to a high level. She was able to learn words, but the learning was strongly, inhibited. Now, so that's one way that they showed how L1 is really dependent on the age that you learn. Another way is in aphasia patients. So these are patients who've had trauma to the brain, and they've lost some or all of their language abilities. But they also found that if you're a child, if children undergo these trauma, they have a much higher chance of recovering their lost language, whereas in adults it's much more difficult. So these are two types of evidence that investigators, researchers show for the phenomenon of CPH in first language. Now, however, Ojima goes on to talk about now second language, so L2 or beyond, so your third language, fourth language. Now, this is much more nuanced. So Ojima went into the distinction between ultimate attainment, so the final level of language that you attain over years, versus your rate of learning a language. And he was able to show through various studies that, again, I'll link his video in the description. Go check it out. It's really a lot of fun. He shows these data from different studies showing that kids over time learn to a higher level. So the ultimate attainment is actually higher, which is what I think we all see in the general public. But there are studies that show that adults actually learn much quicker at first. So this is often observable in immigrant families, right? The parents, due to whatever circumstances, they have to live in that new country, they learn very quickly to speak to a certain level to survive, whereas the kids over time will take over and they will have much better grammar, much better pronunciations, etc., and speak much more naturally in that new country. But once again, the condition is over many years. So this is massive exposure to the language. We're talking thousands of hours of exposure to this new language. So if we're talking, on the other hand, about classroom settings, a few hours a week, then we're actually talking about tens of hours or hundreds of hours at most. And in that situation, he shows that research actually does not support going earlier. Why? Because adults or older children actually learn much better. So they have more. They already have their L1 to fall back on, with grammar, syntax, whatnot, their living experience to aid in that language learning. So they actually learn much quicker at the beginning. Ojima shows this graph, and I thought this was brilliant. So we all know about the hare and tortoise story, and that's really that illustrates how people learn languages. If you're older, if you're an adult, you can actually learn a language very quickly, just like the hare jumps to a quick start, and it's much faster than the tortoise. But slowly and maturely over time, now we're talking past hundreds of hours, we're into the thousands of hours later, the tortoise actually wins over the hare. And the ultimate result, the ultimate attainment actually is much higher if you start early with kids. So we come back to the original question, is my kid too old to learn languages? Well, it depends, right? On what? On whether you're talking about L1 or at least L1-like. So you really want your kid to learn to a native or native-like level, then it's going to be really hard if you don't start early. If you're aiming for more intermediate or conversational or actually working level, professional level, that's fine. Then the research actually does not support you going early. In fact, it may be advantageous to start a bit later if you have limitations on budget or resources and whatnot. Starting later could allow you to learn faster to a certain level. Again, all this is, of course, on average that we see in the general population. It's a rule of thumb. And if your child is exceptionally motivated and talented, then he will be able to get to extremely high levels, regardless of what age he starts. As many of my very, truly amazing polyglot friends in the world, they are able to learn to very, very high levels, despite many of them were monolinguals until adulthood. Now that said, I'm not one of those in the amazing category, but I do speak a few languages, 10 specifically. And I made a fun video showcasing my languages in that corner. If you're interested, please take a look. And right below this window is another video about language refusal, which is another huge issue that parents often come to me with. So please enjoy my other videos, and I'll see you in the next video.